Hi everyone, welcome to the Cedar Springs Homestead YouTube channel. This video is going to be a little bit different. I'm going to show you guys a couple fall meals that we've had on the homestead recently. The first one being one of our absolute favorite fall soups. Kyle, Skeeter, and I went camping a couple weeks ago. We did a grouse camp this year and we were up pretty close to the boundary waters actually in Minnesota, but we got a few birds and so we decided to make our favorite grouse tortellini soup. So this recipe I actually found on Pinterest and it was made with Italian sausage tortellini, but I was like, oh my gosh, at the time when I first made this soup recipe, I was like, oh my gosh, this is a great recipe to use for grouse because I had to use up that meat. If you're a hunter, you guys know you don't want to just kill an animal to kill it. If you're going to kill an animal, you have to eat it. So that's kind of how we always feel with our game that we hunt. So brought this home and made some grouse tortellini soup. So it's actually a very simple recipe. I always feel like with every recipe, the prep is always the hardest / like most time consuming. So I chopped up some vegetables, which were the celery and the onions. Also, I know this is a little different setup with me doing a voiceover and music in the background. I can't remember if I was playing a podcast episode or if I was listening to some jazz music. I love to turn on some jazz when I'm cooking. It's just like it sets the good vibe and it's just very homey and relaxing. But yeah, so I couldn't use the audio that I had from this original clip. So that's why I have some music going on in the background or me doing a voiceover, which let me know if you guys like this. I don't know if this is like too weird, if you'd rather just hear the cooking noises or if you want me to talk through. But I want to do more of these videos for you guys because everyone loves the cooking segments, which I love because I'm happy you guys like it. I love to cook so much. It's so therapeutic and it's just very relaxing. I prepped all the vegetables and I started heating some oil in a pot and I added the grouse meat in it. You really don't have to do this, but I like to just cook it a little bit. I don't know what the correct like cooking term is where you just kind of not like sear it. Can you sear grouse meat? I don't know if that's just for red meat, but basically I seared the grouse meat for a little bit. I topped it with some salt and pepper. I just stirred it around a little bit and then I take it out once I feel like it has a good enough base to start with. So I take out the meat and then what I will end up doing is I'll add the olive oil back into the pot because I feel like after cooking that meat, it kind of soaks up all the olive oil. So, and I don't want any of my vegetables to stick to the bottom of the pot. So I added a little bit more. Then I add the onions and celery. After I stir the onions and celery for a little bit, which I have found, and I'm new to cooking, so like I'm just discovering these things, but I have found if I'm consistently stirring the onions, especially onions and garlic, which I add the garlic here, but when I'm stirring it consistently, it doesn't burn. Oh my gosh, shocker. So I stirred it up really good because I didn't want the onions or celery to burn. After the garlic cooks a little bit, I added some flour. All I'm going to do with the flour is stir it up so it's all absorbed, and then I will add some broth. I added some chicken broth here, and I think the recipe only called for 4 cups, but I did 2 boxes of chicken broth, so that would be a total of 8 cups, and it ended up being perfect because I had more meat than my original recipe that I had posted on Instagram, which if you guys don't follow me, go follow me. It's at Sierra Meyerberg, and our Cedar Springs Homestead Instagram is Cedar Springs Homestead. But yeah, I had more meat than I originally had posted from the recipe, so I needed more juice or more broth so I can get all of the meat under the broth, if that makes any sense. But then the next step was to add some diced tomatoes, and you add the juices into it, stir it all up, and then, sorry, I know this clip is blurry, but it won't be blurry for very long, but all I did was added some Italian seasoning. And be generous on your Italian seasoning. Don't skimp out on the seasonings. Then I add the grouse meat back into the soup so it can cook all the way, and I put the top on and call it good. Let it cook for about 20-ish minutes so the meat can cook all the way through. You definitely want to give it a little stir as you're cooking it, so check on it a few times. There's nothing more satisfying than opening up the lid from your soup and it's just bubbling and it smells so good and all the flavors are just combining all together. I think at about like 20 minutes, I took out the grouse meat. I probably could have cooked it a little bit longer because it didn't peel off as easy, but I took out the meat and just shredded it with a fork. Again, if you cook it longer, it'll just easily shred off. But for me, it was a little hard. There were some pieces of the breast meat that were like super, not flaky, but tender, and it just fell right off, and some were a little tough. But after I shred all of this, I put it back in the soup and I let it cook for a little bit longer because I have to cook the tortellini, and then I add some other things which you guys will see. But yeah, this is like my favorite way to cook any type of like chicken or grouse because it's just so easy. You can get it cooked all the way through and it peels right off. It falls apart so easily. So I didn't show you, but I added the grouse meat back into the soup, and then I add the bag of family-sized cheese tortellini. You can get it at any grocery store. I stir it in, and then I let that cook for about 4 minutes, or just so the noodles can cook all the way. I think on the bag of the tortellini, it says cook for 4 minutes in boiling water. So I think that's what I did. I just cooked it for like 4 minutes, but it ends up sitting there longer anyway. So I wouldn't be like too direct on the 4 minutes because you're going to add a couple more things. So after the tortellini roughly cooks, I add the heavy cream. I didn't measure. I would say a cup-ish. You stir that all in, and then you're going to add some spinach. And the recipe that I had posted on Instagram calls for 2 cups. Oh, I had some salt and pepper here, but I ended up adding the whole bag of spinach because if you cook spinach often, you guys know it shrivels and shrinks super little spinach leaves. So I just added the whole thing. You can't go wrong with too much spinach. So that's what I did. And then I just put it on there and kind of work its way down into the soup. And then it starts to shrivel and get smaller. And you just keep adding more. I got this garlic bread loaf from the grocery store, and I wanted to obviously make a fresh sourdough loaf, but I had just started my sourdough starter back up from being in the fridge, so it wasn't quite ready yet. I really did not like this loaf. It was a garlic white bread, or I don't know what, artesian or whatever. I really did not like it. The garlic surprisingly was too overpowering for me. So I wished I would have just there was like a regular sourdough loaf that you just plop in the oven and just to heat it up. But yeah, I really was not a fan of that garlic loaf. After the soup is all ready, I plated it for Kyle and I. I cut some bread and put some butter on it, of course, and we had our grouse tortellini soup, which you guys, I really, really, really recommend this recipe to you. And again, if you don't have grouse, use chicken, or you can use Italian sausage, you can use ground beef. It is so delicious and it's perfect for fall. I will be making this again for sure, whether it's with grouse or, like I said, beef, Italian sausage. It's Kyle and I's absolute favorite soup recipe in the fall. I got lazy here. I didn't want to break out the cheese grater, so I just grated the Parmesan cheese with a little knife. But it's a nice little fast, quick way to get some shredded cheese or grated cheese on your bread or your soup if you don't want to dirty a cheese grater. The next meal is a childhood favorite of mine, and it's always so good in the fall. It's just a nice little comfort meal, comfort food meal. But I started off by peeling some potatoes, which of course the potato scraps I gave to the chickens. And then I diced up the potatoes and put them in some salted water. You're gonna see me start making some bread dough, and I don't know why I started the potatoes so early. I think what happened was I was cutting up the potatoes and I was like, oh my gosh, you know what would be really good with this? Some fresh buns with this meal. And I didn't have any like Pillsbury biscuits or anything to just like plop in. And if you guys have been around for a while, or if you follow me on Instagram, you guys know we like to do homemade around here. So I made some sourdough discard buns, but they had to rise for about 2 hours. So I was like, why did I start the potatoes so soon? I ended up just finishing up the mashed potatoes. I threw them in the fridge, and then I decided to reheat it later once I started cooking everything else. But I used to be so intimidated by making mashed potatoes. I always have been wanting to make mashed potatoes at home, but was so scared to. But then I found a easy recipe, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is the easiest thing in the world. So like this is the second time I've made mashed potatoes, or the second time I've made this meal, and second time I've made mashed potatoes, period. And it's been pretty good. So I definitely will start to do that more often, because it's so easy. But here I am starting to make the bread dough. It called for yeast and also sourdough discard. I make bread a decent amount. I wouldn't say I make bread every day or like a lot, but I make bread pretty often. And I always forget I have a dough hook on my KitchenAid, and so I'm always mixing it by hand. I always forget to take advantage of the dough hook and have the mixer just do the work, because especially here I was making the mashed potatoes and doing the bread dough, and I was like, oh my gosh, I can't mix the bread dough at the same time and do the mashed potatoes. So I just threw it in the KitchenAid, let the dough hook do its magic, and all I had to do was just add some flour to it, and then I let it knead for a while. But with the mashed potatoes, you guys saw I didn't have a potato masher. I still need to get one. I always forget. It's on my list of things to get, but I just always forget when I go to town or go to a store. So I just used a big wooden spoon, used some butter, and just got it all really liquidy, and not liquidy, that's not the right word, but just like softer. And stirred it up, mashed it, stirred it, mashed it. I add the rest of the heavy cream that I had from our Grouse tortellini soup, which wasn't a lot. I didn't have a lot left. So I used what I could with that. And then I just stirred it up as good as I could, mashed it up as good as I could. It wasn't perfectly mashed, but it was good enough. After the bread dough was ready, I just oiled up a mixing bowl and then I put the bread dough in the mixing bowl and let it rise for about an hour. Okay, you guys are going to laugh because, and this just shows that I have no experience with making buns or homemade buns or anything like this, because I messed up. I really should have just used half the bread dough here, and I should have just made big buns and spaced them out very nicely, because what you will see at the end of the video is a glob of sourdough buns, but not buns. It's just like one big bread chunk, which again, you'll see. But I didn't realize that I had all of my buns too close together. And now, like looking back at recipes on Pinterest or on the TV, when someone's making buns, they have it nicely spaced out where they can rise and they might touch each other, but they're not going to completely combine into each other. That's what happened here. Like I said earlier, I'm such a beginner when it comes to cooking and baking. And I always tell Kyle this, like, I'm so young, I still have so much to learn. And because I get like, I don't think I get insecure, but I'm just more like freaking out, like, oh, don't think that I'm bad at it just because like I'm just starting out. Like, I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm just trying, and that's okay. But yeah, I wish I would have gotten a shot of me showing you how close together the buns were. Oh wait, I think you'll see when I put them in the oven. But I opened up the oven when the time was up and I was like, what did I do? Oh, here we go. Look at how close those are. Oh my gosh. It was so funny. But now I know, I've learned my lesson, and you're not going to be perfect all the time. And that's why I like cooking, because you can just improvise. Yeah. So anyway, I cooked up the ground beef. I browned the beef. I put a butter. I know that looks like a lot of butter, but it's 4 tablespoons. So I stirred in the butter, and then I add some flour here so the broth can thicken up, I believe is why I add the flour. We're making some hamburger gravy here. So I don't think I really went in depth of why this is my childhood favorite. This meal reminds me of my grandma's house, going to my grandma's house, because my grandma would always make this. My mom would get off work, and all my brother and sister and I, we would go to my grandma's house, and we'd always request hamburger gravy, mashed potatoes with corn and buns. This is just a meal that I grew up on, and I love it so much. It's so nostalgic. It's comfort food. It's yummy. It's warm. It's a perfect meal for fall time. And what my brother and sister and I would do is we would get the mashed potatoes on the plate, the gravy on the plate, the corn on the plate, and mix it all together. So it was like a mashed potatoes, hamburger gravy, and corn mash pretty much. But it was so good. Oh, here we go. Here comes the buns. It is a full block of sourdough buns loaf. That's what it is. It was so funny. These buns honestly were not that good. I put a little bit of jelly on it just so it had some flavor, but I don't know. It didn't turn out, but it's okay. I'll try again next time. This meal is so easy and so good. I really recommend making it for fall time, or it's a great winter meal too. It's just, like I said, comfort food. It's very nostalgic for me. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. I know it's, again, very different than what I normally do. I definitely want to do more of these cooking videos and showing you guys what we like to eat at the homestead and what we're making and baking on the homestead. But if you are new, don't forget to subscribe, and I will see you guys in the next video.